Hey guys, welcome back to the Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People Story. How did my $78,000 house purchase end up costing my neighbor her own $300,000 home and her freedom? It started with a simple tax auction and ended with restraining orders, court battles, and the most satisfying legal beatdown you'll ever hear. I never thought buying a house at auction would turn into a years-long nightmare involving a delusional neighbor, police calls, and eventually the most satisfying legal beatdown I've ever witnessed. But here we are. About 8 years ago, I was in the market for my first house. I'd been saving for years, working as a software developer for a mid-sized tech company. The housing market in my area was brutal, with bidding wars pushing prices way beyond asking. I was getting frustrated watching houses I liked get snatched up for tens of thousands over what I could afford. Then my real estate agent mentioned something interesting: county tax auctions. Properties that had been foreclosed due to unpaid taxes were sold to the highest bidder. The process was intimidating and there were risks involved, but the potential savings were substantial. I did my research, spent weeks learning about liens, title searches, and redemption periods. I consulted with a real estate attorney to make sure I understood what I was getting into. Then I started attending auctions just to watch and learn. That's when I saw the listing for a house on Maple Street. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, decent-sized yard, and located in a neighborhood I actually wanted to live in. The property had been seized for unpaid property taxes totaling around $30,000 over several years. No one had paid them, no one had redeemed the property, and now it was going to auction. I drove by the house multiple times. It needed work, sure. The lawn was overgrown, paint was peeling, and I could see some roof damage from the street. But the bones looked solid. What I didn't know at the time was that the previous owner's daughter had been notified about the pending tax sale. I found this out later from county records when I was defending myself against her harassment. As the heir listed on her mother's last will, she'd received certified letters at her home address warning that the property would be sold at auction if the taxes weren't paid. She'd also been named in the legal notices published in the newspaper, as required by law. She could have paid the $30,000 in back taxes any time before the auction, or she could have shown up and bid on the property herself. She did neither. Just ignored all the warnings and assumed the problem would somehow solve itself or go away. I had my real estate attorney do a title search and check for any other liens or complications. Everything came back clean except for the tax debt, which would be cleared by the auction purchase. The day of the auction arrived. I showed up early with my cashier's check for the deposit, my heart pounding. There were maybe 20 people there for various properties. When my house came up, I started bidding. It went higher than I hoped, but stayed within my budget. I ended up winning the bid at $78,000 for a house that would have sold for at least $200,000 on the open market, even with the needed repairs. I was ecstatic. The process after winning was tedious but straightforward. I paid the full amount, received the deed, and officially became a homeowner. The county clerk confirmed that all back taxes were satisfied and the title was clear. I had a lawyer review everything twice. This was legitimate, legal, and completely by the book. I spent the next 3 months renovating. New roof, fresh paint inside and out, updated kitchen appliances, refinished the hardwood floors that were hiding under old carpet. I did a lot of the work myself to save money, hired contractors for the structural stuff I couldn't handle. The roof alone was $12,000. Kitchen was another $8,000. Floors were about $4,000 after supplies and equipment rental. By the time I moved in, I'd sunk about $35,000 into renovations on top of the purchase price, but the place looked fantastic. That's when I met Karen. I was unloading boxes from my truck when a woman in her 50s marched across the street from the house directly opposite mine. She had this expression of confused outrage, like she'd just discovered someone rearranging her living room furniture without permission. She stopped at the end of my driveway and just stared at me. I gave her a friendly wave, figuring she was a neighbor coming to introduce herself. Instead, she said, "What are you doing in my mother's house?" I was confused. "I'm sorry, what? This is my house. I just bought it." Her face went red. "That's impossible. This house belongs to my family. My mother lived here for 40 years before she passed." I put down the box I was holding and walked over, trying to be diplomatic. "I'm really sorry for your loss, but I purchased this house at a county tax auction 3 months ago. It's legally mine now." She literally laughed in my face. "That's ridiculous. You can't just buy someone's house at an auction. I'm her only daughter. This house is my inheritance." I explained the situation as calmly as I could. The property taxes hadn't been paid in years. The county had seized the property and sold it at auction to recover the debt. I had bought it fair and square with a clear title. She cut me off. My mother had some financial difficulties toward the end. I was handling her affairs. This is just a misunderstanding that I'll get cleared up. You need to leave immediately. I told her that wasn't going to happen, and suggested she consult with a lawyer if she had concerns about the sale. Then I went back to unloading my truck. She stood there for another minute, fuming before storming back to her house. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. So very wrong. The next morning, I woke up to someone pounding on my front door at 7 in the morning. It was Karen, with 2 other people I didn't recognize. She announced that she'd brought a locksmith and a moving company, and I needed to gather my belongings and leave her house immediately. She'd sorted out the misunderstanding, and I was trespassing. I told her absolutely not. This was my house, and she needed to leave my property. She insisted I was wrong and tried to push past me into the house. I blocked her and told her if she didn't leave, I'd call the police. She said go ahead, they'd confirm she was right. So I called the police. When the officers arrived, Karen immediately launched into her story about how this was her inheritance and I was some scammer who'd tricked the county into selling me her house. She had this whole narrative worked out where I was basically a con artist taking advantage of confused elderly people. The officers asked for my documentation. I showed them the deed, the auction purchase agreement, and the title insurance policy I'd wisely purchased. One of the officers examined everything carefully, then informed Karen that the sale was legal and I was the rightful owner. She absolutely lost it, started screaming about corruption and how everyone was in on this scheme to steal her inheritance. The officers had to physically escort her off my property while she shouted threats about lawsuits and justice. The locksmith and movers apologized to me and left. Apparently, Karen had told them she was the owner and had been illegally locked out of her own house. I thought maybe the police visit would convince her to back off. Instead, it seemed to make her more determined. Over the next few weeks, Karen waged a campaign of harassment that was almost impressive in its creativity and persistence. She called the county assessor's office repeatedly, demanding they reverse the sale. She filed complaints with the city claiming I was occupying the property illegally. She contacted my mortgage company trying to get them to foreclose. None of it worked, obviously. The sale was legitimate and well documented, but it was exhausting dealing with the constant problems she created. She started leaving notes on my door about how I was living in stolen property and karma would catch up with me. She told other neighbors that I was a scammer, though thankfully most of them ignored her since she had a reputation for being difficult. Then she escalated to property damage. I woke up one morning to find my mailbox smashed. A week later, someone had thrown eggs at my front door and windows. I couldn't prove it was her, but I had my suspicions. I installed security cameras around the property. Within 2 days, I had footage of Karen creeping onto my property at night and spray painting thief on my garage door. I took the footage to the police and pressed charges. Karen was arrested and charged with vandalism and criminal mischief. She spent a night in jail before posting bail. At her arraignment, she tried to argue with the judge about how she was the real victim because I'd stolen her inheritance. The judge was not impressed and ordered her to stay away from me and my property, setting a trial date for several months out. The restraining order bought me a few weeks of peace. But Karen wasn't done. Not even close. She hired a lawyer and filed a civil lawsuit against me, claiming that the tax auction sale was fraudulent because she hadn't been properly notified. Her argument was that as the heir to the property, she should have been informed about the pending sale and given the opportunity to pay the back taxes. My lawyer reviewed her complaint and basically laughed. He pulled the certified mail receipts showing she'd been sent multiple notifications to her home address. We had copies of the published legal notices with her name on them. The county had followed every required procedure. If Karen had ignored the warnings or thrown away the letters without reading them, that was entirely her problem, not mine. We filed a motion to dismiss, arguing that Karen had no legal standing and her claims were frivolous, but we also did something else. We filed a counterclaim. See, my lawyer discovered that Karen's mother's estate had never been properly probated. Karen had just assumed she inherited everything automatically, but legally the estate was still open and unsettled. This was important because during probate, any claims against the estate had to be paid before an heir could inherit anything. My counterclaim was simple. I was seeking damages for all the harassment, vandalism, false complaints, and legal fees Karen had caused me. I had documentation for everything: the vandalism repair costs, the security system I'd had to install, the time I'd lost from work dealing with bogus city inspectors she'd sent to my house, my legal fees defending against her meritless lawsuit, It all added up. If Karen wanted to fight about inheritance and property rights in court, we'd make sure the estate paid for every bit of harassment first. The criminal case took months to work through the system. In the meantime, Karen's civil lawsuit against me was making its way through court. The hearing on my motion to dismiss finally arrived. Karen showed up and launched into a rambling speech about family heritage and her mother's legacy and the corruption of the legal system. The judge let her go on for about 3 minutes before cutting her off. He'd reviewed the evidence. The certified mail receipts, the published notices, the auction records, everything was in order. Karen had been properly notified and had chosen to ignore the warnings. Her lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice, meaning she couldn't refile it. The judge also made the restraining order permanent and ordered Karen to pay my legal fees for having to defend against her frivolous lawsuit. That was about $8,000 right there. But my counterclaim was still active. And because Karen had sued me claiming rights to her mother's estate, she'd opened the door for the probate process to officially begin. The probate court appointed Karen as executor of her mother's estate, which meant she was now personally responsible for managing the estate's debts and assets. My counterclaim became an official estate debt that had to be addressed. Karen tried to argue that the estate had no money to pay my claim. My lawyer pointed out that she'd inherited her mother's house across the street from me, which was worth roughly $300,000 according to recent sales of similar homes in the neighborhood. The probate court reviewed my documented damages, vandalism repairs, security system costs, legal fees, the city code enforcement fees I'd paid for inspections she'd triggered with false complaints, time off work, and emotional distress. The total came to just over $35,000, all backed up with receipts, invoices, and documentation. The court ruled that my claim was valid. Karen's baseless lawsuit claiming I'd stolen her inheritance had been thrown out, but my counterclaim for the actual damages she'd caused was going forward. Karen tried to fight it. She argued that it was her childhood home and she shouldn't have to sell it. The court gave her options. She could pay the estate's debts out of pocket, she could set up a payment plan that would take years, or she could sell the house. Her lawyer advised her that fighting would only add more legal fees to what she already owed. The writing was on the wall. Several months later, Karen's criminal trial for vandalism finally happened. She decided to take it to trial instead of accepting a plea deal. I think she genuinely believed that a jury would be sympathetic to her story about her inheritance, and would excuse her spray painting my garage. She was wrong. The trial was short. The prosecutor showed the security footage of Karen clearly spray painting my property. They showed the police reports from all her harassment. They showed the dismissed civil lawsuit and the permanent restraining order. They brought in the city inspectors who testified about her bogus complaints. Karen took the stand and tried to argue that she was justified because I'd stolen her house. Her own testimony sealed her fate. She came across as unbalanced and entitled, and the jury deliberated for less than an hour before finding her guilty. The judge sentenced her to 6 months in jail, suspended to probation, 3 years probation, restitution for the damage to my property, and anger management counseling. He also warned her that any further contact with me would result in immediate jail time. Meanwhile, Karen had decided to sell her mother's house rather than drag out the probate case for years. It went on the market and sold within a month for $290,000. After the real estate fees and closing costs, the estate netted about $270,000. My claim of $35,000 was paid first, as the court had ordered. Then the estate had to pay off other debts Karen's mother had left behind, including some credit cards and medical bills that Karen apparently hadn't known about. The estate also had to pay the legal fees from Karen's failed lawsuit against me, and various probate costs. After everything was settled, Karen inherited about $140,000 from her mother's estate. Not nothing, but a far cry from the $300,000 house she'd been living in rent-free, expecting to inherit outright. She moved to an apartment across town. I thought I was finally free of her. Then a few months later, I got a friend request on social media from an account I didn't recognize. The profile picture was a stock photo and the name was clearly fake, but I accepted it without thinking much about it. Big mistake. The moment I saw the first message, I knew it was Karen. The moment I realized who it was, I knew she'd just violated the restraining order. Those orders typically include language about no contact by any means, including through third parties or fake accounts. She just handed me more ammunition. The message was long and rambling, going on about how I'd destroyed her life and stolen everything from her mother's memory. She demanded I sell her the house for the original auction price of $78,000, which she claimed was only fair since I'd gotten it for nothing. I screenshot the message, sent copies to my lawyer and the police, and blocked the account. The police arrested her again. This time, because she'd already been on probation for the vandalism conviction, the judge wasn't lenient. She'd been explicitly warned that any contact with me would result in jail time. She served 4 months in jail for violating the restraining order and her probation terms. When she got out, Karen finally seemed to understand that the court orders were not suggestions. I have not heard from her in over 3 years. I still live in the house. It has appreciated significantly since I bought it, especially after all the work I put into it. The roof is new, the kitchen is updated, the floors are refinished, and the basement is now my home office. I have a garden in the backyard, good neighbors on both sides, and a place that actually feels like mine, which it is, legally, completely, and without question. The strangest part is how avoidable the whole thing was. Karen had multiple chances to stop the tax sale. She received certified notices. Her name was in the legal notices. She could have paid the back taxes. She could have shown up at the auction and bid. She could have talked to a lawyer before everything was finalized. She did none of that. Then, after the house was legally sold, she decided the problem was me. She called me a thief. She sent movers and a locksmith. She filed complaints. She vandalized my garage. She sued me. She violated a restraining order through a fake social media account. Every time she escalated, I documented it. Every police report, every repair bill, every court filing, every screenshot, every certified letter. By the time she dragged me into court claiming I had stolen her inheritance, my lawyer had a stack of evidence showing exactly who had caused the damage, and that was the part she never saw coming. Her lawsuit opened the door to probate. Probate opened the door to estate debts, and my counterclaim became one of those debts, so the inheritance she actually had left, or her mother's other house across the street, had to be sold. My damages were paid first. Then the estate paid other debts, legal fees, and probate costs. By the time it was over, she still inherited something, but nowhere near what she would have had if she had just left me alone. That is the part I still think about. She was so obsessed with taking the house she had already lost that she damaged the inheritance she still had. I did not have to ruin her life. She handled that herself. I just stood firm, followed the rules, kept every receipt, and let the system do what it was designed to do. Karen thought screaming loud enough would make the house hers. It did not. The house is mine, and her refusal to accept that cost her almost everything else. The next one is a malicious compliance story. Years ago, I managed a fast food franchise with a staff of teenagers. They were great kids, and between all the horsing around and romantic subplots, the work got done. I ran things fairly loosely, and we had a good arrangement where I'd pretend not to notice they were having a water fight out the back, but when I did go out to check, all the dishes would be done. As long as nobody's parents called to complain about the sopping wet teenager that arrived home, everything was fine. Other managers ran things in a more traditional way, with rules and time clocks. Also a valid management strategy. My area manager would stop by at random. He was a fair guy that liked his checklists. Do X task at X o'clock. My crew were trained in all the checklists and all necessary food and safety stuff, and I did watch that pretty closely, but knew each other and their jobs, so he'd show up and things would be in what I called predictable disarray. This would annoy him. I got word that he was coming, for once, and he was bringing along someone who was buying one of the franchises, using us as sort of a demo store. I was specifically asked to have my crew at their best, adhering to company checklists. I asked, okay, which do you want, my crew at their best, or for us to follow your checklists? Both. My crew did their best work, vaguely supervised with god-awful music piped in through an unauthorized MP3 player and a manager on hand in case a Karen showed up. Water fights and crude insults on the fridge door were common, and they'd routinely lock each other in the walk-in freezer. I was fine with all this because when a bus of hungry football fans showed up 20 minutes to closing in order to feast, my crew hustled, and we still got out on time. They knew their crap and did it their way. My cashiers would trade based on their needs, so everyone got a moment to have a drink or pee without interrupting service. My line cook would run all 3 stations from his station, ensuring perfect coordination and hot, fresh food. I only interfered when it was necessary and was able to be backup for everyone. But stick to the company-issued checklists? Okay. I pulled everyone off the line individually and revised the appropriate checklists with them to make sure everyone knew what they were supposed to be doing. I passed on the order that today's shift was to be run using the checklists, and everyone should do the best they could. It was chaos. Dinner rush hit, and bought a slew of just-off-duty paramedics from the nearby hospital. Fresh off shift, tired from a training session, and hungry. but my checklist planning had only allowed for a Tuesday night dinner rush of people on their way home picking up dinner. I had reserves, but without a crew who worked in sync, each taking the spot they were best suited to, I was stuck with bodies in slots doing the best they could. I had my newest crew member in the drive-thru being shouted at by customers sick of waiting, my best line cook standing miserably by the fryer, and the bubbly pair that usually handled front counter having alternate nervous breakdowns in the drinks fridge. No cleaning got done, I had nobody free to prep more food, customers were pissed at the lengthy waits, and we completely ran out of some products. Instead of the usual finish time, my crew got 2 hours overtime before I sent them home and took a photo of the remaining devastation to send to the area manager, who was already regretting his instructions. The new franchise owner had been disappointed at the staff's lack of initiative dealing with an unexpectedly busy shift and felt it was a lack of effective training. He was also uncomfortable at the amount of running around shouting a manager has to do when things turn to absolute crap. I got a coffee the next morning and something that could have been an apology if you squinted. My crew got a round of frozen Cokes, and "Are you following the checklist?" became the new way to say someone had screwed up. The next one is an entitled people story. I have been sitting on this saga for a while, but since I recently saw the entitled cousin in question and got more tea, I thought it was finally time to share. Here is the story of my entitled cousin, and why I always tell my husband we do not talk about entitled cousin. Entitled cousin is the youngest child of one of my uncles on my dad's side. She is about 6 months younger than my sister, so they did a lot together growing up. Sports, activities, family events, you name it. I remember her as being a nice cousin, but I was never really her playmate because she always had my sister. Plus, I preferred one of her older sisters who was my favorite cousin, but in high school I started noticing that she was changing, and that was when the entitlement really started. She became more reserved, dealt with an eating disorder, did not really have many friends, and developed a nasty attitude about everything. She was short with everyone, downright mean, and showed several narcissistic traits. She would make nasty comments about everyone around her, even her own family. Her spoiled nature started to show too. If the family wanted to go out to eat, it had to be somewhere she liked. She only wanted clothes from high-end stores. She refused to go places she hated. For example, she did not go to her own brother's birthday dinner because it was at a restaurant she disliked. She went to at least 3 different high schools within 2 years. She even tried to come to the high school my sister and I attended, but eventually went back to her original school. Then she went off to college, and her entitlement only grew. Her parents, thanks mostly to my uncle, are fairly well off. This became especially true after my uncle retired and received a very nice retirement package when the company he worked for went public. Entitled cousin took full advantage of that. Anything she wanted, anywhere she wanted to go, her parents paid for it, especially expensive vacations. So, yes, she is entitled and spoiled. Our family knows she likely has some sort of mental health issue, possibly bipolar disorder, but as far as I know, she has never been officially diagnosed. That is also probably part of why she has never had a long-term relationship with a guy. The guys eventually discover her entitled, unstable attitude and leave. As one of her older sisters once said, she drives them away. During one of her trips back home, my mom was visiting my aunt, and entitled cousin said some really unkind things to my mom. To be clear, my mom is not a saint, but that is a whole other story. Still, my cousin was out of line. Entitled cousin and my mom got into a huge fight, and they have not spoken to each other since. They will not even acknowledge each other. A few years later, entitled cousin and my sister got into a huge fight where some ugly things were said on both sides. My sister has since apologized, but entitled cousin never has. They do not speak anymore either. My dad and I were not involved in any of this, but entitled cousin refuses to acknowledge us because of our association with my mom and sister. Her older siblings all think her grudge against my family is weird and stupid. The rest of us cousins are still close to this day, but she is the odd one out. She did come up to me at another cousin's wedding to congratulate me on my first baby because I was in my 3rd trimester at the time, but then she quickly walked away. She did not even acknowledge my dad, even though he is her dad's own brother. Yes, it was awkward. It was even more awkward because she brought her boyfriend at the time to the wedding, only for them to break up a couple of months later. Recently, my sister gave me more tea about entitled cousin. She confessed that entitled cousin was nasty even when they were kids, long before high school. Not as bad as she is now, but the signs were already there. Snide comments, always wanting everything her way, and so on. My sister only tolerated her because our dad and her dad are brothers. But by the time high school came around, my sister started distancing herself from entitled cousin. She did have to let entitled cousin shadow her for a day when she wanted to attend our high school, but thankfully, entitled cousin ended up not switching there, much to my sister's relief. But the biggest tea was about the fight that ended their relationship. My uncle owns a condo in a very famous town in South Carolina. My sister had just gotten her doctorate and wanted to use the condo for a week as a graduation present. She planned to go with her boyfriend, who is now her husband. My aunt gave her permission to use it, so my sister assumed she and her boyfriend would have the place to themselves for a week. Then, a few weeks later, my aunt took my sister out to lunch, which my aunt never really does. At the end of lunch, my aunt awkwardly admitted that entitled cousin would also be at the condo during the same week as my sister and her boyfriend. Apparently, my uncle has a rule that anyone in the family can use the condo at any time, even if there is overlap. My sister was crushed. I do not know whether my sister or entitled cousin asked for that week first. Either my aunt forgot that entitled cousin had already planned to go and realized it later, or entitled cousin knew my sister was going that week and planned to go anyway. My sister called entitled cousin and asked if she could go another week. It would have been easy for entitled cousin because she had a remote job at the time. Entitled cousin said no. Then she said, "What, you just want to be alone with your boyfriend all week so you can sleep with him?" My sister was horrified. Not using her best judgment, she fired back by telling entitled cousin that she had never been in a serious relationship, so she would not know what it was like to have a devoted boyfriend. More fighting followed, and they stopped speaking. Keep in mind, the trip still happened. My sister, her boyfriend, and entitled cousin were all at the condo at the same time, so it was incredibly awkward. My sister later apologized, but entitled cousin never did. Now they do not talk, apart from my sister occasionally giving her a quick hello, and entitled cousin responding with a grunt. Entitled cousin is now in her mid-30s. She has no boyfriend, just a dog, and lives somewhere out west with a small friend group. Shocking, I know. She still goes on expensive trips paid for by her parents, though they usually go with her. Meanwhile, her older siblings are all married with children and living happy lives, which she seems slightly jealous of. She still refuses to interact with my family. If she ever gets married, which would honestly be shocking, my dad thinks my uncle will force her to invite us just to save face, but we would probably all decline anyway. At this point, we have accepted that she does not like us, even though my dad and I have never done anything to her, and that she is just not a good person to be around. I do feel sorry for her, I really do, and I still love her as my cousin, but if she ever wants to repair the relationship she has broken, she needs to acknowledge her own faults. I just do not see that happening, but I guess there is still hope. The next one is an entitled parent story. This happened in 2009 when I was 15 and my sister was 11. I honestly do not remember every detail clearly, so I had to call my mother to fill in some of the gaps. That helped a little. My parents got divorced when I was 10. My mother had primary custody, but we stayed with my father about 3 days a week, sometimes more. They took turns celebrating holidays with us. One year we would spend the holidays with one parent, and the next year we would spend them with the other. In March 2009, my father and his then girlfriend, whom I will call Molly, broke up after he confessed that he had cheated with the woman who eventually became my stepmother. Years later, I found out that the affair had already been going on for almost 2 years by the time he told Molly. He introduced my sister and me to my future stepmother in May, on my birthday, actually. Almost immediately after that, they announced their engagement. From that moment on, she started trying to force all of us into becoming a happy blended family. In practice, that usually meant forcing my sister and me to do whatever she wanted or whatever my stepbrother wanted while pretending my mom was not in the picture. My stepmother and my dad also started pressuring my mom to let us stay with them much more often than my parents had previously agreed. Thankfully, my mom would not budge. In November, we started getting ready for the holidays. My stepmother began talking about a ski resort she wanted to visit with us. I do not remember whether it was technically a resort or a hotel, since this was years ago, but it was about a 3-hour drive from where we lived. From what I remember, it seemed much more suited for couples, younger children, or older people. Neither my sister nor I actually wanted to go. Before we could say that, my stepmother asked when we would be done with school so she could book a 2-week trip during our winter break. I was honestly happy to be the one to break it to her. We had spent Christmas and New Year's with my father and Molly the year before, so this year was my mom's turn to have us. My father and stepmother called my mother dozens of times trying to convince her to let them take us anyway. They insisted that my stepmother was excited to spend Christmas with us and that the previous year did not count because we had spent it with Molly. My mom said no because she had already made plans with us, and the subject seemed to be dropped for a few weeks. Then, on our last day of school before winter break, my stepmother picked my sister and me up from school. That part was normal. We were supposed to spend a couple of days with my father before the holidays. What was not normal was what happened the moment we got into her car. She said, "We are going to the ski resort. Surprise." Then she told us that she and my father had already packed our bags for us and that my dad would meet us there. I asked if my mom knew about this. She said, "Sure." I knew that was a lie. I also did not believe her when she said we would only be there for a couple of days and would be back before Christmas. I figured they had booked the 2-week stay they wanted and were planning to guilt trip us into staying once the couple of days were up. I was terrified. I did not have a phone because my mom thought I was still too young to have one. I did not trust my stepmother, and I could see that my sister was even more scared than I was. I told my stepmother that we did not want to go. She said, "Fine, let us just pick up your stepbrother from school." So we picked him up. Then she said, "Okay, now let us go to the resort." I said again that we did not want to go. She said, "Fine, let us just find a gas station and fill up." That pattern repeated itself about 6 times over the next hour. Every time I said we did not want to go, she made up another excuse and pretended to forget what I had said. As we were about to leave town, my dad called her. I heard them arguing for a few minutes, and then she hung up. My stepbrother asked what had happened, but she did not answer. Then she said, "I am taking you kids to your mom's." She turned the car around and took us home. When we got there, my mom pulled us out of the car and screamed at my stepmother to leave, which she did. My mom hugged us and cried like she had not seen us in years. She did not tell me the full story until a few days later. Basically, my mom had called my dad in a panic because he had never told her that we had gotten home, which he always did whenever he picked us up from school. Apparently, he had been hoping she would not call until we were already at the resort. My father knew lying would only make things worse, so he told her their plan. He tried to spin it as something my sister had wanted, but my mother did not believe him. She told him that if my stepmother did not bring us back immediately, she would call the police. My father and stepmother still took my stepbrother to the resort. For months afterward, they bragged about how much fun they had and all the things my sister and I had missed. Later, my stepbrother admitted to me that he had actually hated it. He barely saw his mother while they were there and spent most of Christmas alone in their room. My stepmother called my sister and me selfish for trying to ruin their holidays. My sister actually felt guilty for a while, and I had to reassure her that we had not done anything wrong. My mom did not call the police or press charges. At the time, she did not know whether what my stepmother had done would qualify as a crime or whether anyone would actually help. She was also afraid it would ruin our relationship with my father, since she was still trying to stay on amicable terms with him. Years later, she told me she regretted not calling anyone. And that is the story of how I got my first phone. For some reason, I really hate this story. I avoid talking about it as much as I can. This post was sitting in my drafts for almost a week. It is far from the worst thing my stepmother has ever done, but it still makes me angry. I will admit, though, writing it all down helped a little. Anyway, thank you for watching.